Well, my girl's a little older now, but I do remember a time when they were much younger, and we were learning as parents of just how to not just only parent one child, but siblings. And we were hearing the stories of other couples who were going through this. We had heard a story of a young boy. He was like 2.5 years old, and he was just the golden child. So his not only his parents, but the in-laws, his grandparents on one side and the other side, he was the first child. And if you know Asian cultures, they just go crazy over like a son. And they just like loved him. They just lavished love, and just kindness. And that's all he knew. He grew up every moment of his life, everywhere he went, he was the golden child. Well, before he knew it, his parents got pregnant, and they were awaiting a second child. And something was shifting in his world. But as a little child, he just didn't realize what was going on. He didn't quite sense what was going on in his world or in himself. All he knew was it's not the same. He's not getting the same attention. They're not all excited to see him. The buzz is not there. And then when the child came, they're just fawning over this young baby. They're just loving this baby. All that was his is not his anymore. And they did the mistake of completely ignoring him. This boy went crazy. He went so in fits of anger and jealousy, like he would try to hit the baby, and he would just do everything to the point where they had to take him to a child psychologist. It was that bad. So we heard that story and we're like, oh, okay, this is no joke. So we did our own job of trying to not only not ignore our firstborn when we had our second, but also we came home with this big gift, this big, huge kitchen, and said, this is Emma's gift to you, Ellie. Really? Right? As a way of kind of saying, she's not going to take away something from you. She's going to give you something. Even then, we were noticing like Ellie, who was the golden child, having to wrestle through issues of jealousy. Yeah. It happens amongst children. We would love to think that our kids only are so lovey-dovey and nice, but if you know the reality of the situation, sometimes you see that kids, they know what jealousy feels like. Okay? It's ugly. It's ugly. It doesn't get any better along the way. Anything somebody has, you want. We can make fun of it. We can kind of say stuff like, hey, you jelly bro, We use that language to kind of make it light. Even to say, how awesome am I that you are jealous of me, you jelly? But in fact, it's actually really real. It can destroy relationships. Something deep-rooted in your heart where not only just a friend, but even family members, they become your enemies because they have something that you want. Envy is no joke. It is something that is as old as Cain and Abel, that has everything to do not only with a sinful heart, a broken heart, but also with a broken relationship with God. And in many ways, if it's not addressed, it can destroy relationships. We are on the fourth of the enemies of the heart. And as we are discussing this, we realize that we're almost done in our Grace Group series. We spent a little time introducing why we talk about heart issues, because they lie under the surface. And many times we address them. We have coping mechanisms. We have ways of dealing with them that doesn't bring life. But we find that during the series, God has his way of not only addressing and healing our heart issues, but bringing us into a way of living that brings life. And that's exactly what wisdom is. That's exactly what it means to kind of have a life with God. And it means letting him reorder our very responses in our hearts. Today, we're talking about jealousy. Next week, it's Mother's Day, and so we're not gonna have a grace group format for next week. No grace groups. But the week after that, we're having our last one. It's about heart shepherding. And so just be aware that our season is coming to a close, and this is the fourth of the four enemies of the heart that we're covering. James takes some time in addressing this in his community. Now, James is the brother of Jesus, and so you would think that he knows how to lead a community. He saw his brother. He might know a little about jealousy because, James is looking at his brother, and his brother, he's like the son of God. Okay? If anybody even known anything about jealousy, James kind of, and you would imagine he would. But actually, he's ministering in a community that, if you read the book of James, where there are a lot of people who are rich and poor. It is a multi-class environment. And in many ways, it's very good that they have that kind of family. In that context, in his time, there were very few communities, very few societies that could see the rich and the poor, the slaves and the slave owners in the same community. It was not just only rare, it was not to be found. So it's easy to kind of say, oh, James is dealing with immature people. But no, it's the fact that when the gospel took root, a lot of different kinds of people who are different nationalities, different languages, different backgrounds, and even different kind of socioeconomic status, they were brought together as family. And when you see that, guess what? It's going to start, you can see all of the heart issues come out, including jealousy. So it's great to see that the gospel at work brings people together who are even rich and poor, and yet, guess what? You see human sinfulness and human reaction coming out. And so he's trying to teach, what do you do when you see this kinds of quarreling, when you see these kinds of jealousy? Trust me, if you are poor and you see another poor person find success, you get jealous. If you're rich and you see somebody richer, you get jealous. But when you see a poor person seeing a rich person, it gets even more so. So you can kind of understand the context here. And in his context, he's talking about, what does wisdom look like? It is a key word for that community. What does wisdom look like? And for many, wisdom is to kind of, you know the wisdom literature, you know the scriptures, you know what to say to look like you are wise. But he makes it really, I love James about this. He brings it down and dirty down to, no, wisdom has everything to do with how you live and your relationships. He says, who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. In other words, if you want to see what wisdom looks like, look at how you live, your actions, your relationships. And then he flips it around saying, this is the exact opposite of wisdom, a different kind of wisdom that is destructive. He says, if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. What is he saying? On the one hand, you can describe what wisdom is, but it's seen in the way that you live. Then he flips it around and says, but some people live a certain way, and it's proved out that if you see how they're living, it's not wise. And what is the foolish part of it? They are harboring bitter envy, selfish ambition in their hearts. So if you haven't figured it out, guess what? Jealousy, envy is a heart issue. It is a heart issue. Something inside that expresses itself out that is not wise. He actually even goes to say, such quote-unquote wisdom, he's being ironic here, is the farthest from, does not come from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual. He calls it straight up demonic. That this kind of bitter envy and selfish ambition does not come from God. It is a different kind of way of a strategy for living and doing your relationships that is so ugly that it comes straight from Satan. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you have disorder and every evil practice. When jealousy, when envy is let loose in a community, in a family, in a society, it actually causes incredible destruction because it comes from, it is sourced in something that is demonic, a demonic approach. What do you do with when you have desires and you see somebody have something that you want? How do you address that? What is the response? Well, the response of the heart of someone who is sinful and listening to a way of living that is demonic is jealousy. It's envy. He goes on to say, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from the desires that battle within you? So he's saying, the quarrels are not just about immaturity or about you just don't understand each other or, it's just natural. In a way it is, but he's focusing it on something very specific. He's saying, there is something in you, every single person that wants better, that wants something good, and often that even though that's something that God has put in your hearts, to desire is not a bad thing, okay? But in this context, this desire is begun to overgo its boundaries. disregard God and make everything about satisfying those desires. It becomes a demonic desire. He says, you desire, but you do not have, and so you kill. I don't think anybody has died because somebody's murdered somebody, but if you think about it, yeah, that's what desire does. Okay? Look at the story of David and Bathsheba. It is the worst experience of his life, the place where you can see all of his sinfulness just in full display. How did it start? It started by him going up on a roof and seeing Bathsheba bathing, and he wanted her. Desire that had no accountability, that just drove him, basically caused him to not only lie and cheat, ultimately kill. He actually killed her husband. And so that's what he's making that connection about. A desire that is unaddressed, that is let loose and aligned with kind of the way the enemy does life, to take, actually ends up killing. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. He associates this jealousy, this sense of, I didn't even know it, but I really want that thing, with actually a desire that's gone outside of its bounds. Once again, desire is not bad. There are other religions, there are other ways of strategy of saying, if you want peace, if you want to become whole, all you got to do is not desire. Okay? Attachments are all bad. This is a Buddhist way of thinking. That if you can somehow not desire anything, you are free. That's not actually what he's saying here. He's not saying, shut down all your desires. God doesn't want you to have desires. What he is saying is, what do you do when you can't handle the fact that those desires are so strong and they surface when you see somebody else having something that you want? In fact, this language of coveting and this inappropriate desire is found in the very 10 Commandments. It's called straight up sin. Now, if somebody would have a very hard time arguing that killing is not bad, right? Of course, killing is sin. Or adultery. Of course, adultery is bad. Lying is bad. That's actually kind of getting fudged around these days, right? So on and so forth. Stealing is bad, right? Yeah. But most of us don't realize that this is in the 10 Commandments. And in many ways, it's not just the last, it is a bit of a linchpin of sin. Why do you kill? Why do you commit adultery often? Why do you cheat and lie and take and steal? Ultimately, it's desire-driven. It's desire-driven. Does that make sense? Andy Stanley tells us to be so aware of how dangerous this is. He says, envy is a powerful force that can wreak irreparable damage on any relationship or organization. As long as jealousy rages unchecked, no relationship you have is safe. And he goes through how sometimes husbands are jealous of their wives. Sometimes parents are jealous of their children. Can you imagine that? Yeah. That the child has something and gains something that sometimes the fathers are very, very jealous of their own sons. How sad is that? Any relationship, any organization, even the church, if it just keeps going, it can be so damaging. And so he says, until you find a way to deal with your jealous heart, you will be unable to follow the very most basic of the Christian tenets. What is he saying? Unless jealousy is dealt with God's way, it's forever going to be a block from being the kind of community, kind of person that God would have us be. The basic Christian tenet of to love one another. Jealousy is the very obstacle to do the very thing that we're called to do. Our very identity. We talk about this, that psychologists can narrow down all of the world's psychological and heart issues down to this. That you haven't experienced, so you don't feel like you're loved, and you don't know how to love others. Okay, you can actually boil down all of the pain of human relationships in life down to those two simple things. And if you let jealousy kind of run amok, guess what? It will be impossible to love somebody else because they represent to you what you do not have. So what do? Okay. He continues on saying, until we are willing to fully embrace this truth that James so clearly spells out for us, that jealousy and envy is demonic, and that desire actually, unchecked desire is the issue. Okay? What ends up happening is we have no choice but to try to squeeze out our happiness and contentment out of the people around us. He's saying, if you don't pay attention to this jealousy, guess what? That desire is going to try to look at the people around you, your very spouse, your very children, your very people, your friends, people at your work. And you're going to try to use them, squeeze some kind of happiness or contentment out of them. Here's the problem. They're doing the same thing. They're trying to squeeze theirs out of you. Okay? They desire something, and it's a zero-sum game, and so they're taking something from you. You're taking something from them. Okay? And eventually, everybody suffocates. When you see people who are in a culture or in a context of just jealousy, nobody is happy. Okay? Somebody even described this as jealousy of the 7 deadly sins is the one that's the most displeasing. You would think that it wouldn't be so bad, but it makes you the most miserable. That's why they're describing that. This explains why people who are so caught up in social media, okay, so connected many of them are just really, really depressed. Yeah. You would think that I know this is going on, I know that's going on, I'm so connected with this person. Instead, they're seeing what other people are doing, and they want to do that, but they can't do that. Okay? And so social media doesn't actually bring you into a sense of happiness. It actually makes you more frustrated, okay, or anxious. FOMO is a very recent thing that's brought on by social media, okay? But FOMO, ultimately, the anxiety that you can't do everything because you want to do everything that they're doing and you're afraid of missing out, is actually rooted in what? Jealousy. Yeah. So you're trying to squeeze life out of them. They're trying to squeeze life out of you, and it's so easy to get caught up in the blame game. Okay? You blame people that actually you love. They're there for you, and you don't know how to deal with it. Well, if we would understand that jealousy is not just about desire, but it's this recognition that in that desire, it is a heart response saying, God, why aren't you satisfying this desire? This is the kind of the insight that I think has been really helpful if you would track along. Jealousy is the fact that you're saying to God, it's not so much that person has something and I'm angry at that person, that's kind of true, and I want to take what they have, but ultimately you're saying, God, why is it that you didn't give me what they have? Okay? So, for example, jealousy is God owes me. When I think about somebody, I realize I'm a very jealous person. Pastors can be jealous. They can be really jealous. They can be jealous about the churches. Okay, some people come and say, "Oh, your church is so happy. You're such a loving church." I'm like, "You jelly, bro?" Right? But pastors can be jealous. It's very true. But I realize, anytime I see somebody really athletic, oh my gosh, I'm so jealous. Because look at me, right? I was never the fit, the svelte, the athletic person ever in my whole life. Any sport I play, it's because I try to develop skills so I can have some kind of advantage over people who are just straight up athletic. But I'm not angry at athletic people. I'm like, God, why'd you have to give me these legs, these thighs? It's unfair, I have these calves. If you would see my calves, you'd be like, oh my gosh, it's a useless weight, right? Right? And whose fault is it? Whose fault is it? I can't draw worth a lick to save my life. And I see artists, and they can express themselves. I am so bitter. Not really, but kind of really. Yeah. I'm like, God, why can't I have that? It's not that I'm angry at the person who has that. I'm like, why was I deprived? Yeah. It's really a sense that, God, you shortchanged me. I can see it because that person has it and I don't. You shortchanged me. You owe me. Some of us are too young to have really paid attention to this movie. It's called Amadeus. If you ever watch this movie, it is a beautiful description of what jealousy does to a person's heart. And how ultimately jealousy is God-oriented. It's God-directed. Salieri is this composer, and he doesn't have a great upbringing. He doesn't have a great father, and he's a self-made person. And he takes his meager gifts, and he just pours everything he has into music. And he makes this prayer to God. God, if you would make me someone famous, make my works last, and people would say, they would glorify you, quote unquote, through it because of what I made. If you would make me immortal, then I will give you everything, my industry, my every hour of my day. He makes this bargain with God. Because to him, to make music that lasts is his greatest desire. And then he comes across this insolent, this bratty kid, Amadeus, who is just so straight out geniusly gifted. In fact, his wife brings him, his young wife, who they ran out of money, and so she brings him just some of the manuscripts of his music, just to look at, because he pays her. He says, I'll give you some money. And as he's looking at these drafts, he's finding that there's not one correction. And it's perfectly written out. This genius music at just, whatever's in his head is coming down to the page effortlessly. Better music that he could ever write after 1,000 drafts. And he is at first just stunned at the power and the beauty of this genius. And then he becomes angry. He becomes bitter. Because he knows he could never do this. But God is the one who gave this kid, this bratty, horrible kid, this gift. And then he makes this prayer. No longer is, God, if you would make my works immortal, I will give you everything. It's, you and I, he's talking to God, are now enemies. Because you would give this gift not to someone like me, but to someone like that. And I'm going to do whatever I can to take that away. I will harm your creature, your incarnation. Isn't that interesting? That's what jealousy does. Rick Warren says, envy or jealousy, I'm using them synonymously here, is a resentfulness. Not just the fact that another person shows you what you don't have, but as a resentfulness that God is the one who gave something good to other people. You see something of God in another person's life, a skill, a gift, a grace, wealth, okay? And a resentment builds up that God was the one who gave it to somebody else. But in it, not only you're resentful and you're seeing, because you're seeing God's goodness in others, it is implicitly you're ignoring the fact God has put goodness in you. It's a type of blindness. Envy has everything to do with God. And so, Andy Stanley tells us, this is the strategy of a sinful heart, a demonic way of doing things. When you are resentful, you take it from somebody else. You hurt somebody else, or you try to build yourself up to not hurt so much. Okay? You deal with it in a way that has nothing to do with God. But Andy Stanley is saying, James as well is saying, this is how you should deal with it. Instead of burdening the people we love with desires that they weren't designed to fulfill in the first place, they cannot satisfy those desires for you. James instructs us to bring them to our Heavenly Father. He's suggesting something far more powerful than just asking God to change someone else so that we can get our way. Okay? We're not just asking to satisfy our desires for our own pleasure. James is instructing us to bring our deepest desires and unmet needs to the Father in trust, in surrender, in saying, God, you've given me much goodness. More goodness is coming. I'm going to bring this pain, this longing to you, and I'm going to follow in the way that you are going to satisfy it. So it's interesting that after all this language of how deadly jealousy is and how it's rooted in a desire that goes beyond its bounds, James says, you do not have because you do not ask God. Interesting. What is the solution to jealousy? It's not shutting down your desires or trying to satisfy them by taking. It's actually asking God. So simple. Because God was the one who made you with those desires. God is the one who promises to satisfy them in a healthy way, in a godly way. And God is the one who is going to make you whole. The jealous response of being angry with Him, demanding from Him and taking from others, never satisfies this. And as you're asking God, isn't it interesting that usually in a lot of these Bible verses, the asking comes with a thankful heart. Okay? It is a way of saying your asking has to do with a sense of trust, not a selfish ambition or just envy-driven. Asking God means, I know you're the good God. I know you've given good and you will give good. So I'm going to ask in thanks. Asking and thanks are the two positional aspects of a heart that is moving away from jealousy and that is actually being freed from it and is going to find that God, who is a good gift giver, is going to give many good things to you. And so it's kind of like readying yourself, preparing yourself for God to truly satisfy the desires that He put in you. So we've been talking about habits of happiness. What do you do when you have, guilt? You confess. What do you do when you have a heart issue of greed? What do? You're generous. And the one before that, what do you do when you have anger? What do? You are to forgive. So what is the habit of happiness that corresponds with what do you do when you recognize you've got some jealousy? Yes, you bring it to God. You ask God, because He's going to one who's going to supply. But one of the aspects of the very powerful aspect of a way of you deal with specifically an issue of jealousy is you celebrate. Okay? So let's say you find yourself profoundly jealous of somebody at your school. So I use this upstairs because sometimes there's students up there. And you are trying to get into a good college. And you are just so jealous of this other person who is so gifted and has all of the wherewithal, and they got into Harvard. And you're like, oh, and they ask you jelly, and you're like, I'm not jealous, right? And you realize, oh my gosh, I got issues here. Okay, what do? Or what's even worse? What if your friend's children who got into Harvard? That's even worse, right? If you're an Asian, you're laughing because that's true, right? Well, what do? Well, when you recognize, oh my gosh, I should be happy, but I'm not. I'm not happy with what I am at or my child's at. How do you undermine? How do you flip it? By grace, you go and you celebrate with them. You enjoy the success that God's given them. You amplify just the celebration of God's goodness on them. And it's interesting. It begins to loosen and tear apart this hold of jealousy. You pray for the people you're jealous of, that God would bless them. God would be good to them. God would, bring them even greater life. And when you're able to pray that authentically, that jealousy has no chance to root itself. We want to be a community that knows how to celebrate. Often when we celebrate kind of, oh, that's great, right? But when you really enjoy God's goodness in another person's life, when you really learn how to put your heart into honoring God and just really lavishing kindness and love and celebration in another person's life, that begins to open up so many doors so you learn how to really love somebody. Okay? The next time somebody is celebrating something and you just don't want to go because you're just hurt that you didn't get that, that's the very reason that you shouldn't just go. You should go overboard to celebrate for them. Invite people into celebration. It is such a healthy habit that we get to do. And I think that's one of the things that God's going to just press on us as a community. Because every single one of us is prone to jealousy. And if we let it run amok, it can destroy irreparably family. God's family get to experience such incredible joy and freedom, even as we celebrate. Would you bow your heads with me as we pray?